In the wake of the Charlottesville rally and attack last weekend, the New Yorker published a fascinating, frightening article entitled, "Is America Headed for a New Kind of Civil War?" The reporter talked to the experts and came to some startling conclusions. What is going on in America? How did we come to this? Joining me now, Robin Wright, the reporter of that New Yorker article. She is a contributing writer for thenewyorker.com. She's also a joint fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace and the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. Angela Rye is a CNN political commentator. She is a former executive director and general counsel to the Congressional Black Caucus. Mark Liller is a professor of the humanities at Columbia and the author of a terrific new book, The Once and Future Liberal. And Roy Blunt Jr. is an author, humorist, and former reporter. He spent his formative years in the American South, and that region continues to be somewhat of a muse for him. He's written book after book about it, including a biography of Robert E. Lee. Mark Liller, let me start with you. Steve Bannon is out of the White House, but his intellectual influence seems to still dominate in the sense that he said, in effect, he said, I agree with Mark Liller. I agree with the thesis of your book, which is that as long as the left plays identity politics, it's great for the right. And he said, bring it on. I would love to see more of it. And it does appear that Donald Trump, whether he still has him in the White House or not, is still listening to Steve Bannon, because that is the strategy the Trump administration and Trump personally is pursuing.
If Steve Bannon says it works for him, I'm inclined to agree with him. He's someone who knows his business. Identity politics in this country really means two things. On the one hand, it means a focus on understanding our social problems. And to understand any problem in America, you need to understand identity. But when it comes to addressing those problems, identity politics as a strategy has been disastrous. Because rather than establishing a connection between those who are affected by these problems and those who may be unaware of them or unaffected, you need to build a bridge between people.
So you're saying when blacks say these are black issues, whites don't feel like they connect to them?
Well, it's even worse than that. I think in some of the more radical identity groups, they say, you must understand me and my problems, and you can't understand me because you're not me, because you don't belong to my group. And that's a terrific turnoff to people, and it's a missed opportunity to build a bridge and to see that there are certain principles and certain experiences that we share in this country. It's an opportunity to gain allies, and identity liberals just keep shooting themselves in the foot.
Angela, the problem is identity politics has been played by non-liberals as well. I mean, in a sense, the right has always played with some form of identity politics, just white identity politics. I mean, that's what all the dog whistles about race have been, Reagan starting his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, all that stuff, right?
Even you think about the war on drugs, you think about when the Tea Party rose for the first time and they started talking about let's take our country back. You think about Donald Trump saying make America great again. What makes America not great? Well, he announced at the very first moment he came down the escalator in his campaign that Mexicans were drug dealers and rapists. So it's very clear that anything other, right, is wrong, is bad, it's something that you can't relate to, and it's damaging the country. I was initially nervous about what you would say about identity politics, and I couldn't agree with you more about building bridges. I think the challenge is when I'm forced to communicate my issues in a way that's digestible or comforting to you, then that means that I'm uncomfortable. And so where is the bridge that goes both ways to ensure that we can have a dialogue where we are fostering understanding? And I think for me, as an African-American person, I often find myself on the defense, not just because someone can't relate to me, but because so often I'm in the minority. So it's a minority view from a minority person that you assume is angry. And so there's so many hurdles you have to overcome just to get across that bridge.
But your point is find those issues that unite, economic issues, issues of redistribution, right? I mean,
no, it's even more than that. It means reinterpreting what the problem is. For example, I'm not a black male motorist. I will never be a black male motorist, and I will never fully understand what it's like to be in a situation where you look in the rearview mirror and you see the lights going. However, I am a citizen. And I understand what it means not to be equally protected under the law. And if you put the experience under a principle we all share, then people can identify. But if you say that you cannot understand my experience because of your background, you're inviting people to close the door.
So, Robin Wright, this gets to it seems to me, the fundamental issue in your article, which is we seem to be so far apart. We seem to be so far apart as a country. Mm-hmm. What I've been struck by in the last few days is the stunning degree of support for Donald Trump's position after Charlottesville, the very high support for maintaining every Confederate monument. These are in the 70% range for Republicans, I think the 80% range on some, depending on how you ask the question. And that gets to your article. I mean, is this gulf so wide that you think, on the basis of that reporting, we really are in for a new kind of civil strife, if not civil war?
Well, I think no one's talking about the kind of pitch battles along neat geographic lines that characterized the Civil War 150 years ago. What people are talking about is low-intensity conflict with sporadic, episodic violence that results in calling out the National Guard and that challenges traditional political authority. I think you've seen a number of conditions in this country that get far beyond identity politics, although emerge from identity politics, and that's the polarization, with no middle ground, no meeting place to resolve it. It's the weakened institutions, such as the courts, and it's the abandonment of the higher moral ground by leadership. It's the legitimization of violence as a means of engaging in discourse or resolving disputes. That there are a lot of things that are very worrisome. Now, I am a child. I went to college in the late 60s and the early 70s during the period of the Civil Rights Movement and the anti-war movement. And the United States has in the past had a process of self-correction through the courts or through legislation. We got back on track. What's worrisome now is that you find that the leadership in the country is not taking that higher moral ground, and it is fanning the flames of polarization. And the firing of Steve Bannon is not going to get us beyond this moment in history, beyond the divisiveness. The problem started long before Charlottesville, and the danger is that because of the kind of support we see by so many behind Donald Trump, that this is something that is going to be with us for quite a while.
Roy, how much of this is the South? How much of this is the fact that we have never completely come to terms with it? I think about it because, when people say, well, there's some similarity to the Germans dealt with their past. Well, the Germans dealt with their past partly because it is absolutely clear in modern German interpretation that Goebbels and Himmler and Rommel and all of the Nazi henchmen were bad, terrible, evil people. You will never find a statue to them. There is ambivalence about Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, well, Robert E. Lee was a symbol. The South, and not just the South, but the whole country seemed to need somebody after the Civil War. The Civil War was a horrible, sordid carnage. It was just a horrible thing. The more you read about it, it's just disgusting, that war. So they put up statues. There's a statue in Augusta, Georgia that says, carved on it, "No nation rose so white and fair, none fell so pure of crime." That's just like standing out in the corner saying, "We never did anything wrong. It's embarrassing. It's ludicrous." So to me, I'd love to take those things down. And Robert E. Lee was a living statue, or a recently deceased statue, who was supposedly pure, and he never earned a demerit at West Point, and he was a much more complicated man than he was held up to be.
We've got to come back, and when we come back, I want to come right back to this issue that Robin Wright raises, which is just how much political conflict and strife are we in for going forward.